Welcome, familia. This is Ray Collazo, your host of the Found Translation Talk Show, your home for Latino politics. Thank you so much for joining us. You can follow Found Translation on social media at FIT_talk show. I want to welcome my co-host today, one of America's great political analysts, communication specialists, and the soccer coach of one of the hottest women's soccer teams in the country, Enrique Chaurand. How are you, brother?
Oh my gosh, Rafael, you are too kind. I don't know if I would say all that. You got to be my hype man. How much do you charge?
You can't afford me, brother. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Bruce Arena has nothing on you, brother.
Oh my God, yeah.
I mean, man, I can't believe you're still coaching soccer. What is it, a travel team or something? I mean, Latinos just stop. There's no off season for you guys.
No, I am taking a back seat though on the coaching. I finally have. I'm an assistant now, but yes, my two younger girls play soccer. They're on the travel team, and they're doing amazing. I'm really proud of my girls. Yeah, and it's just a lot of fun. It gets me out of the house, gives me something to do. As we have talked before, I grew up playing a lot of baseball, for me, my oldest boys, they play baseball, but to have sports still in my life, I got to have sports. And at some point, I know this is the place to talk politics, but we got to talk sports at some point, Rafael, because I love to chat with you. And for everybody who follows you on your other channels knows that Rafael, is big in the sports scene there in Philly. He's got a lot of contacts there.
A little something. Well, Philly's just one part of it, brother. And I actually, in my shout out segment at the end, I actually have a sports comment shout out that I think you're going to particularly appreciate. And you're a humble guy, man. You played at Arizona State, not a small thing. You played big time college baseball, brother.
Well, I was a walk on, man. Hey, I take it. It was for a season. I was a bullpen catcher. So what are you going to do? I couldn't compete with all the All-Americans that they had on the squad. But hey, I'll take it.
Hey, you were on the team, brother. Quite an accomplishment. On this episode of Found Translation, we appreciate everyone watching and listening. Please subscribe to the Found Translation YouTube channel, as well as particularly our audio channel. You can find this podcast anywhere. You can download a podcast, Spotify, iHeart, iTunes, just anywhere you can you listen to your audio podcast. Very important. We're going to be releasing these episodes every Friday. There was so much to talk about, and we do have others. We give love to our friends like Chuck Rocha, Latino Vote, Latino Rebels, but there's so few places where Latinos really entre nosotros can have for real conversations about politics, and we keep it real here, and so we give you the unvarnished version of what's happening, because we need y'all to get this information, understand what's going on with our politics, so you can make your own informed decisions. But also, we need you to spread the word about what's going on in our politics, not the national chatter, not the sort of sleazy side of it, or the and we're going to talk later about things that we're actually that are happening positive in our community that we need to celebrate and understand that organizing matters, and we have a voice in this society, but we got to keep pushing the envelope. There's no question about that.
Absolutely. I think one of the reasons why I love coming on and doing this with you, Rafael, is because we are bringing information inside baseball, I think, right, in a lot of ways to the community, given the work that you've done previously, given some of the work that I've done, really shines a light on the work that's happening, the work that needs to happen, right, to continue to ensure that the Latino voice, voters in particular, are heard, have all the information to make an informed choice when they're at the ballot box. And, speaking of the ballot box and what's going on, holy crap. Well, not only do we have the midterms, and I know we're going to get into that here in a little bit, in the importance of the Latino vote, but, it is so critical this year. It's critical every year, right? But I think more than any time in our history, right? 2022, these midterms are vital and critical. So speaking of 2022 midterms and preserving our democracy, we got to talk about January 6th hearings. Rafael, I mean, my goodness, if you haven't had a chance to watch the last couple of days of hearings, I encourage you to go back to doing so. But my gosh, this is just, we learned so much the last couple of days. For political junkies like Rafael and myself, this is must-see TV. On Tuesday, we heard from the Arizona Speaker of the House, Rusty Bowers, Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger, another election official. I know one of Rafael's favorite guys from Georgia, Gabriel Sterling. And then we also heard from Ms. Shay Moss, who's an election worker there in Georgia. They talked about the pressure that they received from the president and his supporters, and it was just very, very powerful testimony. And then yesterday, my gosh, yesterday, we heard from DOJ officials, Steve Engel, Jeffrey Rosen, Richard Donahue, and all three of them laid out the multi-layered conspiracy and pressure that they received from Trump, and ultimately, really, his desperation to stay in power. It was like a movie script. It really was. It was. I hope at some point they will make a movie of this. But anyway, Rafael, I know you got a lot to say about this. I'd love to hear what your thoughts are.
There's so much going on in our politics, and we're going to get into. I know there's people curious about our thoughts about not only 2022 elections, but also, the resurgence of the new Congresswoman from South Texas, Mayra Flores. We're certainly going to get all those things, but we have to start with January 6th, because again, if you don't have a democracy, what are we talking about here? And I think that I think we all knew, particularly people in our space, Enrique, that President Trump had an active role in January 6th on some level, but I don't think we really understood the depth and of how hands-on literally he was in trying to surrender democracy from the perspective of pressuring the DOJ, from the perspective of pressuring Mike Pence, from the perspective of actively being part of, and that was some of the highlights from the hearings on Tuesday, earlier this week, pressuring state officials, whether it was in Arizona or Georgia. And, I sat back thinking about, as I was reflecting on it yesterday, is that, in the midst of, it's literally how he spent from election day, even before election day, through the inauguration of President Biden, obsessed with trying to figure out a way to overturn our election, basically end our democracy, while we still were in the middle of a COVID crisis. I mean, we still were just rolling out the vaccine, if you recall, in December of 2021 or 2020. There's a myriad of issues, Russia, our economy, healthcare, just a million things that presidents should be focused on. The transition process, typically outgoing presidents really focus their administration, especially the senior leadership, on the transition process. So we have a smooth process, turnover of power, and including the fact that the COVID crisis was in a critical stage of getting ready to roll out the vaccine distribution. And so obviously they weren't focused on that. They were focused on how to stay in power and turn over this election. I want to show this clip, Enrique, because in my mind, this clip really solidifies the fact that if there was any question or any ambiguity whether or not Attorney General Merrick Garland should vigorously pursue prosecuting our former President Trump, then I think this clip really ends that conversation as far as I'm concerned. I want to get your thoughts, Enrique, again about the commentary, this quote, and also the sort of theatrical messaging and the way the hearings have gone over the last few weeks.
The election was corrupt, and leave the rest to me and the Republican congressman. So, Mr. Donahue, that's a direct quote from President Trump, correct?
That's an exact quote from the president, yes.
The next note shows that even that the president kept pressing, even though he'd been told that there was no evidence of fraud. The president keeps saying that the department was, quote, obligated to tell people that this was an illegal, corrupt election.
That's also an exact quote from the president, yes.
Let me just be clear. Did the department find any evidence to conclude that there was anything illegal or corrupt about the 2020 election?
There were isolated instances of fraud. None of them came close to calling into question the outcome of the election in any individual state.
Enrique, somewhere in Hades, former President Nixon's like, I did nothing compared to this guy.
That's right.
Enrique, your reaction. The smoking gun is really, smoking tanks. The Constitution was truly in crisis.
Absolutely. And I don't know if the president was that smart or if the people around him were smart enough to feed that corrupt just nature in him, because you hear how Trump didn't even know how the basic functions of government happened, right? The levers of government, right? How they functioned. I mean, there was even a part in there where Mr. Donahue, when he was asked if he should fire Clark, right? He was the gentleman who was trying to position himself to take over as AG that would then further this conspiracy.
Who found himself in his underwear a few mornings
That's
ago.
right. Yeah.
So
An
I hope he
an
gets the
FBI
message,
raid.
brother. We're not playing around.
Yeah, an FBI raid. And I have to say, when I found out the FBI raided his house, I was, I screamed hallelujah. Finally, somebody is going to pay, some sort of penalty for their role in this.
It's unbelievable.
However, I'm really at a loss for words. You get bits and pieces when, as a former communications person, right? You leak stuff to the media that you conveniently want to get out there, right? You want to get in front of the narrative. So, we all had our sources, and you have folks that you work with in the press that you trust. We have been getting bits and pieces of, some of this work for months, but there's a lot of new stuff that is being unraveled, that is being shown to the American public. These are a couple of examples like that. How can you not take that to mean, hey, the Justice Department needs to say that this is corrupt? Why? There was no evidence of that. He was essentially pressuring them to say that this is the corrupt, to sow those seeds of doubt so that they could put in their fake electors and take over the election, right? This is really manipulated by a lot of people. And now these members of Congress are running scared, right? They were asking for pardons. Mo Brooks this morning, I don't know if you see the text message he put out there. He put a letter. He revealed an email that he sent to the White House saying why he would need a pardon, and all these other members of Congress would need a pardon.
I was in touch with a Latino leader who has been a political rival of Congressman Perry's in central Pennsylvania for decades. It's been political operative, former Democratic city council person, basically ran the city of York years ago. And I said, I know, now the country sees what we've known for many years about the unethical behavior of this gentleman.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the committee's done a masterful job of laying it out. I will say, the way that they've used the video testimony, right? They've got the receipts in forms of tweets, right? They're plain as day. Everyone can see them. And again, just about, I think every witness, like 12, 13 witnesses, all of them, I think, except for one, maybe, are Republicans. Right?
And most of them appointed by Trump.
That's right.
Through
So
this administration.
I think that's been masterful. I think they've done a great job. I think giving Liz Cheney the opportunity to, not only sometimes open, right? The chair has allowed her to kind of open and then close, right? She always gets an opportunity. If you notice at the end, kind of sum up what's heard and then to preview what's going to be coming next. I think that's very well done. Those folks who don't like her, she's a rhino, whatever, they're going to cast her aside. But for those voters who are on the fence, they're not sure where they're going to go and still respect Liz Cheney for standing up and stating her principles. I think it's very, very effective, and hopefully will sway some voters in this year's midterms. I think that's also part of the play by this committee is if you're even on the fence and you're thinking about voting for somebody who Trump has endorsed, you may think twice now about that.
No, and she made a special note yesterday. I thought was very, very interesting, and I think smart to not only sort of just repeat what's been seen over the last few weeks, because now Fox is starting to show these these hearings during the day, and they're actually, even the right wing media is even covering it more. But that to say that some of you who may be watching this were sympathetic to and believed that the election was stolen, and maybe went to DC or was sympathetic to the people that went to DC on January 6th for good reasons, feeling that that they were told that the election was stolen, and obviously not being happy about that if that's indeed what happened, but reiterating but you were lied to. And so it's trying to, especially from a conservative Republican perspective, even though she's sort of on the outs with the fringe now, is that I understand you may have had legitimate reasons to feel this way, but you were lied to, and this person manipulated your good intentions in that sense. So the fact that it's coming from her voice, again, like you said, how effective that'll be to assuage or persuade certain people, particularly they're still loyal to Trump or MAGAism, remains to be seen. But they're doing a fantastic job. Enrique, people bug me. I become very popular for like 3 months every other year because right before midterm elections or presidential elections, I get people texting me, calling me, hey, Ray, what do you think? Who's going to win? What do you think? Who's going to win? Who's going to win? What's going to happen? And what I told people last summer is what was true. I said, look, Biden's going to win the election. He's going to win between 5 and 7 million votes, which is what happened. I said, the question is, to what extent, what will they do to steal this election? And so what I couldn't anticipate at the time, which was I was the most concerned about, was that Bill Barr actually would only go so far. And Mike Pence, another sycophant to Trump, would only go so far. And these handful of officials who probably were more less political in nature anyway, would only go so far for this guy, even though they were loyal to him for lots of the nonsense. And by the way, for over a year, they haven't said anything to anybody. They had to be subpoenaed to Congress to tell the truth. So, they're heroes, but, relatively speaking. So it's just amazing how my worst fears actually were reality.
Mm-hmm.
And we're just lucky that really, if you really look at it, it boiled down to 10, 15, 20 players, particularly Pence and Barr, that, just wouldn't go there. And so that's how precarious our democracy is. And that's why we're going to talk a little bit later about 2022 elections that, even though, the gas is high, we understand FAM prices. I understand there's certain feminine products women can't get right now. I understand there's a lot going on we're not happy about, but there was so much on the line greater than even, this blip in the economic situation right now. And Enrique, we come back, we're going to take a very quick break. We come back, we're going to talk about sort of the push and pull of what's going on. There's some great developments when it comes to gun safety and legislation, but then on the judicial side and on the what we're hearing more and more in Uvalde, just more and more mess. So when we come right back we're going to check out a quick clip from the best of previous episodes. And we'll come right back here on Found Translation, your home for Latino politics.
No, because listen, a mí me dieron mucho de la chancleta y la correa. I was not a well-behaved child.
Oh, who you telling? A mí me sacaron del parque jugando basketball a chancletazo limpio.
There you go.
And I had one of those typical moms que te decía, te dije que llegara a las 7 de la noche.
Exactly.
Ahora, súbete para arriba. And every time she mentioned a word, there was a chancletazo with that one behind it.
That's right.
I'll tell you, Enrique, you can't mess with a Latina mom, bro. When she tells you to be home, then you better be home.
Oh yeah, I got plenty of smacks upside the head and on the backside.
I don't say chanclas. We go chancletas.
Right.
Puerto Ricans, you always got to be a little extra.
Yeah.
Chancletas.
Yeah, no, we got the chancla. And especially in church, you're sitting there, you're messing around. You used to get that pinch, like right underneath, just enough of your skin to be like, you better.
My dad's a pincher. He was a pincher.
My mom was like,
my mom just went straight to the chancleta. There's no doubt about it.
Oh,
but Enrique, when it comes to, we this actually was a historic week in many respects for the gun safety movement, and I think a lesson for people to that you can't lose hope. We can make progress, even though it feels very daunting.
Absolutely. A couple things that happened yesterday. 2 major developments surrounding the gun debate. The first was a Supreme Court decision that struck down a New York state law that was meant to restrict people's ability to carry guns in public. The second was the Senate's passage of a bipartisan bill that came down, 10 p.m. last night or so. This is the most significant change to federal gun safety law in about 30 years, which unfortunately is sad to say, 30 years. The vote passed by a 65-33 vote. But Rafael, I want to start with the ruling on the New York law being struck down by the Supreme Court. This was a 6-3 ruling. No surprise that Clarence Thomas delivering the majority opinion. A lot of folks are saying this is a major blow, not only to the state of New York, but other states who are thinking about how they can pass sensible gun laws. So, Rafael, before I get your reaction, I think it's important to say that the New York Governor Hochul said that the ruling was outrageous, that at a moment of national reckoning on gun violence, the Supreme Court has recklessly, in her words, recklessly struck down a New York law that limits those who can carry concealed weapons. Is she right?
She absolutely is. This really is sort of an extension of what my analysis and our analysis over the last several years about our political climate. So in one respect, America as a culture, forget the politics for a second. America for the culture is going in one direction, the direction of inclusivity, multiculturalism, generally speaking, sort of a more inclusive, progressive society, from a cultural perspective, and you see that in how we, from corporate America to just in common, just in common society, much more accepted to Pride Month, for example. In many respects, Becky G now is, sort of the symbol of American, the American spokeswoman for T-Mobile and cultural products, because she really represents the future of this country. A 20-something-year-old Latina who's upwardly mobile and making a contribution in our country, who's bicultural. And so we see the culture going one direction, then our politics is going another one. And so we see that reflected in really what's been the long-term goal, and now successfully, of the far right wing, as their influence in our culture subsides, or they feel like they're more vulnerable now, and that their worldview is shrinking in our country, and their culture, their part of our culture is dimming in influence. Is that they've taken decades, but it's happened now that they have a 6-3 or even 5-4, depending on what Roberts does, control of not just a center right agenda, but really a far right agenda. And so you see this in the Supreme Court decision. The fact that now basically anybody can walk around with a gun in public for any reason. And that's just going to cause a myriad of headaches for our police force, by the way, not just our society, more violent. And there's this sort of odd situation where on some level the far right, gives lip service to the cops and law enforcement, but then does everything to do to subvert them. And just thinking about what happened in Uvalde, part of the dynamic there was that, and this happens all the time in the streets, that the cops are outgunned because they don't have AK-47s, like AK-15s, like some of these young kids out here. So, or too many people with riot gear and protection and everything else that should not be sold in common society. So we're having, on one sense, and so now the culture now seeped into our politics in a positive way. So the consensus for over a decade, certainly since Sandy Hook, is that these high caliber weapons should be off the street, and we should have more gun safety legislation. It's taken too many tragedies, but the Uvalde sort of being the tipping point, where now we actually get 15 Republicans. I can't believe we got 15 Republicans, and they get to pass at least a first step in gun safety legislation. So the work that's being done on the ground, from Sandy Hook to Buffalo to countless local communities to now, unfortunately, the latest Uvalde tragedy, shows that organizing consistently, staying hopeful, making your contribution, having your voice heard, telling your story can make a difference. And I want people to understand that even though we're all very disappointed by the Supreme Court decision, in the same way that the conservative movement, it took decades for them to get control of the Supreme Court. It's taken us a generation to get this far in gun safety legislation, but here we are. And so we should feel good about that development this week.
Yeah, I think so. I hear you, and I know that it's frustrating for folks. As somebody who has family in law enforcement, I've got several cousins who are police officers,
No doubt.
and we all know people, right? I also have a couple of cousins who are FBI agents, but all of them have told me, and we don't agree on everything. I don't agree on everything with them from a political perspective, but when it comes to guns, every one of them has said there is absolutely no reason for people to be walking around, whether it's concealed or not concealed, with a gun. As you said, right, it's also a public safety issue. I mean, especially for police officers, you don't know what this person is capable of. You don't know what's going on in their life. Were they mad that day or something else happened? Before you could settle disagreements, with these, right?
That's long gone, man.
That's long gone, right? Now it's people are quick to, pull out a gun and squeeze a trigger to settle their differences. And it also puts a lot of pressure on police officers, right? How many deaths could be avoided, right? How many situations could be then, dispersed, or at least, you can end more civilly, right, without someone having to lose their life. But unfortunately, this sets an ugly precedent, right? States are now trying to take action because of inaction. Now, hopefully what was happened, and I think this is a good transition to what last night's bills, and we could talk about the bill that passed last night, but now that the Senate has finally done something around this, right? Hopefully this will now give states some ease, right? They don't have to try to figure out what they can and cannot do because of the inaction in Washington. But as you said, right, the bill that was passed last night was a bipartisan bill, right? There was 15 Republicans that joined Democrats, but now it has to go to the House. And Nancy Pelosi said they're going to take this bill up swiftly. They're going to vote on it quickly. But you already have the majority of House Republicans saying that they plan to vote against the bill. So there's a lot of bill. There's
luckily that won't matter, from
yes. But anyway, what are your initial reactions to the bill? And ultimately, do you think it's going to help to curb?
It's an initial first step. I mean, look, it's going to save lives, and I think that I encourage people to see the different, whether it relates to more funding for mental health, more background check capabilities for younger people, young adults. So there's lots of good things about it. I think the boyfriend piece, and I want to give a shout out to Cristina Vega, one of our many Latina leaders as it relates to From Love Shouldn't Hurt, who's engaged in domestic violence issues and policies. So, closing that gun hole, that loophole for, boyfriends or former boyfriends, former lovers, partners, getting access to weapons is going to save women's lives. There's no question about that. We've lost many women just here locally in Philadelphia with that same dynamic that could have been prevented by this law if it had been passed earlier. So it's a positive first step. It's one step though. It's one step. And for us to change and get stronger gun laws and get these high caliber weapons off the street, we got to change the politics. So we've got to work on, getting more Democrats in the Senate and keeping, our majorities and changing the dynamics in our states with governors and state legislators. So the work doesn't end. It just continues. And so, we have to remain hopeful and continue to support, the movement that's taking place now, continue to support these families in Uvalde and these other victims throughout the country. And not let the gun industrial complex and these terrible actors, particularly in Republican politics, from not being held accountable for their shameful actions. I mean, Cornyn voted for the bill, but Ted Cruz did not vote for this bill. He had constituents die, senselessly, and he continues to be tone deaf to humanity in his state of Texas. So there's a lot more to be done.
Yeah, well, Ted Cruz is not a surprise. You've already heard him. Once the tragedy happened in Uvalde, he was in front of the camera saying, we need more guns, we need to arm teachers, and then his whole one door theory, right? We just need to close all other doors and just have one door.
Yeah, that's not a fire hazard, Ted. That's not a fire hazard.
I sometimes I wonder how this guy even went to an Ivy League school. I mean, I guess
the worst thing about it is that the worst thing about Ted is that when Georgia Senator Rafael Warnock won election last year, I text one of my buddies, said, "Oh, it's good to have a tocayo in the Senate." And he was like, Rafael, you already have a tocayo in the Senate. Rafael Ted Cruz. I said, oh, that's right. I try to forget that, brother. I try to forget that. Enrique, when we come back, brother, we're going to have my first sort of state of play with 2022. This is really my first state of play of 2024. I want to give people a preview because I got some things to say about not only what's happening as it relates to the Latino vote in 2022, but also I'm looking ahead 2024 because that's already started. I know people also want to know there's a certain election that took place down in the Rio Grande Valley that I know you have some questions about, and I want to get your reactions as well. We're actually going to hear, speaking of this question around how gun violence and the intersection of gun violence and domestic violence, I want to hear from one of my co-hosts in this best of clip, Betty D, the freestyle diva from Houston Station, 80s, 90s pop star, now an activist as it relates to women's issues and Latino issues. An incredible, very powerful monologue on this subject she did on a recent episode. We'll come back and we'll talk about the Latino vote and my very bold prediction that I'm going to, the first of many that I'm going to share here on Found Translation.
I mean, no one, no abuela, no mami, no tía, no hermanas, no hijas, primas, amigas, desconocidas should fear for their lives and their right to live. So today and every day, Bomba Life and our families, the Bomba Life family, stands against domestic violence in our communities. Everyone deserves a relationship free of domestic abuse. Now, full of love, compassion, support, equality, encouragement, safety, and empowerment. That's what they deserve. Now, we will survive by together changing the abusive culture and traditions. We will together stop the shove and start the love. I mean, no.
Thank you, Betty. Very powerful message from Betty D. Not just a music superstar, but a passionate activist, particularly around women's issues. And, you'll be seeing other announcements very soon. Betty's going to have even a bigger role in our platforms. And as we sort of reconstitute our Bomba Live show, we're going to keep it here with the politics. Found Translation is going to remain your home for Latino politics. And speaking of Latino politics, Enrique, this is sort of my first state of play pronouncements.
So are we going
to the upcoming elections, brother? Because again, if you want to know what's going to happen in November, you got to watch right now, because we're the Nostradamuses of politics here, because we break it down for you here on Found Translation.
Well, that was going to be my question. So we're going to come back to this clip, right, in about a few months and say Rafael was right. I
ain't hitting 1,000, brother, but I hit pretty high.
All right.
Pretty high.
That's my prediction for you, by the way. That's for sure. Well, Rafael previewed it. All right. So this is the segment here where Mr. Rafael Collazo is going to share his analysis and predictions for the not only 2022 midterms, as he talked about, but also 2024. More and more now, people are starting to run for president, years in advance. Typically, it would be maybe a year and a half. We're talking 2-3 years already. People are prognosticating. People are making predictions. But there's a lot to get in today. Rafael, though, I think the first thing to talk about, though, is, and you alluded to it earlier, was Congresswoman Mayra Flores, her win down in South Texas. She handed the Republicans a victory that was in a pretty strong Democratic district for many, many years. Were you surprised that she won? And overall, what are your thoughts about her victory?
Surprised, no. And there's some mitigating factors. The person that she's going to run, she was running in a special election, and the moderate Democrat, Filomena Vela, who had been there a long time, basically fumbled his retirement early, so that it precipitated this special election. So the person she's going to run in a new constituted race because of redistricting, Vicente Gonzalez, who's an incumbent Democratic congressperson in a more Democratic friendly district in November, was unable to run in the special election for logistical reasons. So, there's a chance she's a sort of one and done. She may only be in Congress 6-7 months. But I think it does speak to something that, Democrats have continued to underinvest in the Latino community for a long time. They've been criminally underinvesting in the Latino community in Texas. I mean, this should still not be a reddish state. It just shouldn't. If you look at the logistics, it's almost minority state. It's 40% Hispanic. And we have an increasing sort of electorate moving in places like rural, suburban Dallas, suburban in Austin, even in places like San Antonio and Houston, of, sort of white or, more traditional Democratic progressive voters moving into the state because of the tech sector and other business opportunities. So this state should at least be purple. It certainly should be as competitive as Georgia or North Carolina. And it hasn't been, because Democrats have not empowered the Latino community, because empowering Democrats in Texas would be empowering Latinos. So white Democrats have made the calculation, better to keep the status quo than having 2 Latino senators, a Latino governor, and Latinos controlling the state legislature and the economic and the budget strings of the state.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the decision that was made. So this is what happens. And in fact, don't take my word for it. This young Latino who just got in the Senate has her own way of putting it. I want you to analyze, Enrique, the clip of Mayra Flores' acceptance speech as she was inaugurated into U.S. Congress just days ago.
Madam Speaker, I rise today to give a voice to the voiceless, to say that the people who live and work in South Texas have had enough. We want to be heard, and we are tired of being treated like second-class citizens. I was born in Burgos, Tamaulipas, Mexico. Sí, señor. and raised with strong values to always put God and family first. My father, Saul Flores, moved us to the United States because of the promise of America.
Wow.
Hey, Enrique, let me tell you something. My wife sent me that morning. My wife at like 6 a.m. when she woke up, the first headline she saw, she DM'd me and said, "Is she a Republican?" Can you give me a reaction to that?
Yeah, I mean, good for her. As someone whose family migrated from Mexico as well, I can empathize, and I not only empathize, but I think it's great that she had an opportunity to not only move to this country, better her life, but became a citizen. There are still a lot of folks out there who are still waiting in line to get their citizenship and have done all the right things as well, right? I think part of her comments too was also, we need to stop the flow of illegal immigration, so forth and so on. And that's what gets me. These Latinos who are able to, go through the system, do it the right way, then go back and say, well, we have too many coming in here illegally, get in line. Well, there's a lot of people who have been in line for decades. I know people who have tried to do the right thing. Everybody wants to do the right thing. Nobody wants to be in this country illegally. That's another question. Maybe we got to have Carlos Guevara back on to talk about immigration reform and where things are with that. But, I was with her up until she said that stuff. What doesn't surprise me, though, is that part of Texas, right, where, you're on the border. People come and go from Mexico, right? You even have kids who go to school maybe in Texas and live in Mexico, and vice versa. So that part of the country is used to that border transiency that happens all the time. It's just part of the culture down there. But to your point earlier, yes, this is an opportunity missed for Democrats down there. The family values, peace speaks to all Latinos. Fernand talked about that last week when we had him on the show regarding the polling in Nevada of Latino voters in Nevada, Arizona, and Pennsylvania. So nothing that she said surprised me. I think she's you also have to consider the source. She did share QAnon conspiracy theories. And when she was asked about it, she literally told the reporters, and she was asked about this on Fox, by the way.
Yes, she was.
She told the reporters, focus on what's in front of you. She did not want to answer the questions. She said she does not believe in those conspiracy theories, but she, hashtag QAnon, she shared all this stuff. So to your point, is it a bad look? Yeah, it's a bad look for the party, but in 6 months, it's going to be a real election for her, right? In 6 months, she's going to really have to run a campaign. She's going to have to go against somebody who has a lot of name ID, who knows how to do politics down there, who is well known and recognized. But the party needs to do more to support these kinds of candidates so that we don't have, we're not losing seats, because we can't afford to lose any more seats.
Now, it's so interesting because, most people are not going to do the digging that you do, Enrique, and we do, right? So, she says these nice things. And look, and this is part of a bigger frustration with democratic politics, progressive politics, that we see these concepts to the right all the time. Family, we love our family. We love God. I mean, who doesn't? I mean, and so, that is and as someone that's young, that has an immigrant story, that honored her father in her comments, that's a mother, that to someone that's just going to see that clip, that's a very appealing message, an appealing messenger. Mm-hmm. And so, and the things she said, there's some truth in them. Democrats have forgotten about a lot of these communities. Now we could argue, well, Republicans really, but the point is that Republicans are manipulating in these very specific communities where, a Hispanic's going to get elected one way or another, in South Florida, South Texas, manipulating and promoting strategically candidates like Mayra Flores and others to spread this message and put themselves to put a very appealing face to a party that in reality is doing everything they can to subvert the Latino community. And we don't, thinking about what's happened in Texas, talking about this mental health conversation, with every metric, the Republican Party that has controlled Texas politics for 20 plus years has done everything they can to deny Latinos health care, to deny Latino schools funding, and to do everything to militarize our communities, make our communities police states, particularly those close to the border. So there's the reality of the fact that Republicans have not been friends to the Latino community, but with a couple of strategic messages appealing to our emotions, appealing to our spiritual backgrounds, appealing to our love of our families, we get put in a position like this. So, Mayra Flores is someone that we have to keep an eye on, regardless if she wins in November or not. It pretends the things that comes, because she will not be the last Latina that the Republican Party props up there to be an appealing face for a party that has, other than wanting to restrict abortion access, and we saw reports that now people in Texas, women in Texas, are going to Mexico to get abortions. Other than that, they're not offering much, and throw more people in jail. They're not offering much to the Latino community.
No, the last thing I'll say about this is the Republicans are even trying to erase the history and contributions of Latinos in Texas, right? If you look at just the curriculum changes that they've made, and this was a few years back, right? They want to whitewash history, right? They don't want to talk about, the massacres that happened and how they took the land from Mexico and, native Mexican tribes that were there and things of that. I mean, that they want to whitewash. And for somebody like Mayra, from Mexico, from the state of Tamaulipas, right, which is right around the border, where they have the Tauromara Indians and the Indian tribes there, you would think that she would know her history a little bit, and say, hey, my people were massacred here in Texas. So, that eso me choca, it just really gets me, but to your point, I think you're right. She's a great messenger, right? Married to a Border Patrol agent, right? 4 kids. So, the whole family dynamic piece plays a big role into that. But at the end of the day, Filomen Vela, he had to have delivered for his constituents. If you're delivering for your constituents, right? If you're providing opportunities, right? So whether that's funding coming to your district, right? Providing services, however you can, make lives better for your constituents, that's also part of the job. So, to me, that also speaks to whether or not he was actually delivering for his constituents. But we'll see what happens.
Well, that's also been part of the dynamic. I mean, let's be honest about it. The South Texas delegation has never been, champions of, of our, they're not exactly hitting grand slams, that group. And so I think the 2 Latinas on the Democratic side, now Mayra's the 3rd in the Texas delegation, Escobar and Sylvia Garcia, I think it pushed the envelope. And I think, Congressman Castro in San Antonio has always been a great champion, but that's also been part of the dynamic. These guys have been it's all been men in South Texas traditionally. They've had the same seats, and frankly, they haven't, they haven't always been, kind of our great champions. I will say this in closing on this conversation is that we had Mayra Flores. We also had in the neighboring congressional district, Jessica Cisneros, a very progressive Latina immigration lawyer, take a very entrenched conservative Democrat, Henry Cuellar, to the brink in a runoff election. I mean, she only lost that election the same week by a couple thousand votes, if that. So, in the same way that a right-wing Latina can win, you're also seeing that, very progressive Latina messages also are resonating with people. So it's about who's doing the work, who's connected with people in a real way, and who's treating our community with respect to ask for a vote. So I think people should take seriously Mayra Flores and her message, and we're going to continue to monitor it really quickly on the Latino vote in 2022. We'll have other episodes to get into this more in depth. I think we all know that, in a normal election cycle, incumbent presidents always have a difficult time that first midterm, retaining whatever power they have or influence in Congress. Now, the political killer of all of them has resurfaced, and this happens every 15, 20 years. Inflation. There's some of the worst inflation we ever had. So in a normal cycle, the chances of Democrats keeping any control of either chamber would be minimal. But if you look at the Cook political report and you look at some of the polling, Democrats actually have a decent chance of holding on to control of the Senate. And that's because, in no small part, because the Republicans are not focusing on the issues that either voters in general or Latino voters care about, like inflation, or providing any answers to that. They're electing Senate candidates and gubernatorial candidates that are focused on the big lie
That's right.
pushing anti-democratic positions, pushing voter suppression, pushing xenophobia, pushing QAnon, pushing restricting women's rights, restricting LGBT rights, demonizing Latino immigrants. So the question will be, will Republicans not make the gains that they should by all rights, by all normal political calculations, because they're not running real candidates and people that are really trying to address the issues of voters. And then the polling that we've seen, Enrique, it's clear that even if people aren't super happy with Biden, they're not really convinced that either Trump or anybody on the Republican side has their best interests in mind. So I think turnout is going to be really the key to who controls, particularly the Senate. The House is going to be really difficult, and even in the best case scenario. But the Senate is going to be really interesting. And the last thing I'm going to say before we go to the last break, before we go to shout outs, my first prediction for 2024.
Let's hear it.
It's clear to me after what I've seen in I want everyone to see this. It's clear to me that what I've seen this week with the January 6 hearings and looking at the political landscape, it's clear to me that right now the favorite to be our next president in 2024 is Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. There's no question about it. Donald Trump, there's a good chance. I cannot see a scenario where Merrick Garland does not prosecute President Trump. And that process is going to take time. But between being prosecuted, potentially being convicted over the next few years, and just the time and the continual erosion of the Trump brand, I just don't think, even if he runs in a primary, in the middle of being prosecuted, I don't see him pulling it off. And Ron DeSantis, I think we're going to continue to see, assuming he wins in November, which is not a foregone conclusion, but likely he'll win the governor's reelection.
Yeah.
I think that he will look very appealing to people that like Trumpism, but don't like him anymore, or are sort of just tired of him. And he's got a very kind of folksy, goofy, everyman kind of style that, quite honestly appeals to working people, even some Latinos in places like Florida. So he's very dangerous. We can see the kind of right-wing, ultra-right-wing administration he's had in Florida. No, don't say gay. The CRT attacks. He continues to not lift a finger to address issues that impact real Latinos, like healthcare access, housing, affordable housing in the state, which is probably his biggest sore spot that we need to continue to emphasize. But I would have to say that after seeing everything the last few weeks, I think Ron DeSantis is the biggest threat to our democracy at this point, and not Donald Trump. So, Enrique, we come back, we're going to do shout outs, and I have one last clip for you to analyze about a Latina who made possibly the biggest new voice to our stage that we have to pay attention to as it comes to politics in the hemisphere. So we'll come right back after watching a clip of the best of Found Translation. We'll come back to wrap up the show. There's great artists, and I'll just say kind of in the rap world, just for example, there's great artists that are great in the genre. Then there's special artists, the truly greats, that move the culture and move their fan base forward with them. So Bad Bunny is not just like the best in the game, but he's changing the game. Because what I think, to your point, Tanya, what this album is doing, his new music is doing, is maturing his audience. And he's pushing us to go along on his personal journey and his artistic journey. So y'all need to catch up. And I think about like Jay-Z. Jay-Z was wearing basketball jerseys. So everybody wore basketball jerseys. Then one day, Jay-Z, as my brother would share his perspectives, he's wearing, suits, and now he's a business guy and he's about flossing, and then everybody changed their game. Welcome back to Found Translation. In this final segment, Enrique, I want to show you a clip. I want to shout out the new Vice President of Colombia, Francia Marquez. Not only just became the Vice President as a Latina in Colombia, but the first Afro-Colombiana to be a Vice President in that country. I want you to see a clip. I want you to get your analysis, Enrique, your bilingual analysis of this clip. She was interviewed on a recent national news show in Colombia about whether or not she's going to move into the vice presidential palace that they have in Bogota. And so I want you to give me your analysis of this very intriguing, I think, provocative conversation that the new vice president of elect of Colombia had on national television in Colombia recently.
se va a mudar a esa casa que queda a una cuadra al occidente del Palacio de Nariño, o si eso no hace parte de lo que usted denomina vivir sabroso.
Pues no creo que vivir sabroso se refiera a tener una casa. Yo hoy, gracias a Dios, tengo una casa digna, ¿no? Y entonces si creen que porque soy una mujer empobrecida, ya porque me dan una casa presidencial, ya estoy viviendo sabroso, están muy equivocada. ¿Sí? Eso es parte del clasismo de este país. Lo miras desde ese lugar. Te invito más a reflexionar qué significa el vivir sabroso para el pueblo negro, en sus entrañas, de nuestra identidad étnica y cultural. Se refiere a vivir sin miedo, se refiere a vivir en dignidad, se refiere a vivir con garantía de derechos. Entonces, cuando me colocas que voy a vivir sabroso porque voy a ir a la casa vicepresidencial, seguramente estás muy equivocada.
Wow. I'm a fan. Just hearing that clip, that was
Enrique, I mean, you talk about a woman that knows how to message, huh? That's powerful.
Absolutely. Yeah, I thought, wow. Thank you for showing that clip. I just think it shows how she seems to be really not only in touch with who she is, but with her constituents and folks in Colombia. I think that was really powerful. And not only that, she mentioned, of course, being somebody who's Afro-Latina, right? I mean, there's the classism piece to all of this as well that we've talked about before in the Latino community, right? And that Afro-Latinos have said for years, right, that they face not only racism outside of the Latino community just generally, but also within the Latino community as well. So kudos to her for that. I think that takes a lot of guts to say that on air, but she's obviously a woman of her convictions and believes strongly in that. So that was great.
No, and that was a very interesting election cycle in Colombia. It was a very close election, but this is sort of the most progressive president elect and vice president and that they've had in quite some time. So we'll see how their administration progresses in Colombia, but it does speak to this growing movement, not just in the United States, but throughout Latin America, of Afro-Latinos throughout the Americas wanting to a seat at the table and acknowledging and being very clear that we have to acknowledge the Blackness that is such a big part of Latino culture, and that Afro-Latinos, as you just stated, Enrique, are discriminated against, and we have a lot of racial issues. You know, I mean, when I was a kid growing up in the 80s, you know, and American television was a lot further along as it related to race relations and showing just Black faces across the board and positive Black images in our community. So kudos to Vice President-elect Francia Marquez. We'd love to have her on the show at some point, talk about what's going on in Colombia. And kudos to a great friend of mine, one of my Mexican compadres from Luis Potosí, by way of East Chicago, Indiana, Rudy Lopez, who actually just did a mission in the same barrio that Francia is from in Cali, Colombia. So he was just sharing with me his update about, you know, some of the dynamics that take place within the Afro-Colombian community in Cali, Colombia. Enrique, very quickly, any last shout outs you have on this episode of Found Translation?
Yeah, you know, I want to shout out really quickly a movie that I just saw. You know, I saw the one, it was The Hustle, right? You said, you told me to look at that. What a great movie. That was a great.
It was cool.
A lot of your boys from Philly that were in there.
Come on, homies were in that joint. Yeah, no.
Yeah, you know, I'm telling you, everybody, Rafael, you got to get Rafael's. If you see Rafael, you have to get his. You got to get his autograph because Rafael is a star.
Nice. That's very nice.
Is a celebrity. Is all right. No, what a great movie.
I'm just a gadfly.
Yeah. Well, gadfly with a lot of knowledge and with a lot of connections. But no, I thought that was a great movie. As a sports junkie, I thought it was great. It kind of showed some of the behind the scenes stuff that goes on. You know, we spent the weekend, my kids and I showed them Bull Durham. They had never seen Bull Durham. I thought it's a great baseball movie.
Oh, it's fantastic.
So we watched a couple of sports movies, but thank you for that recommendation. So I thought that was a great one. Thank you.
No problem. And I have not seen, at some point, I'm sure my wife will loop me in, but I want to see it anyway. The Menudo documentary. It just came out on HBO yesterday. I know Latinas are going to be, eyeballs peel when they get out of work today to check that out. And that should be interesting. But I did want to shout out to your point around the sports. I want to shout out Isaac Paredes. Isaac Paredes is a Mexicano that hit 3 home runs for the Tampa Bay Rays this week. And Enrique became the 5th Mexican ever to hit 3 home runs in a Major League Baseball game. Offline, we will test your knowledge, see if you come up with the other 4. But I did want to give out Isaac Paredes a little shout out because, hey, the Dominicans get a lot of love. My people get a little love with the baseball, but there's a strong tradition in Mexican and Mexican American communities of baseball. And Mexico has actually a very excellent baseball major professional league, which is taking place this summer down in. Do you have a team in Mexico that you root for in the Mexican?
I don't follow that as much as I should. I mean, MLB, of course. When I'm down there, I try to catch a team, a game or two. Mexico City has a team that I'd go down there with my primos. But those are more border. Most of the border towns have baseball teams. Right?
Very good teams. Yeah,
really, really good. Andres Galarraga, he's got to be one of the 5.
He's Venezuelan, brother. He's not even Mexican. We're not going to bore the audience with you keep missing these. I got 3 of the 4, but I missed one. But anyway, we'll talk about it. People should Google it and Google Isaac Para, this young talent. My compadre, one of my compadres, Jorge Martinez, Dominican guy. His dad played AAA baseball, and then when he didn't get to the majors, he spent 1 year in Reynoso and actually won the championship. He was a star player, I think in 69 or 70. And they brought him back for like the 50th anniversary or whatever it was, not too long ago. So much respect to Don Antulio Martinez and Mexican baseball. Enrique, thank you so much for joining me on Found Translation, your home for Latino politics. Please follow FIT_talk show on social media and let us know what topics you want to get into, what art, we're going to be bringing on other political experts in the coming weeks. And we hope everyone has a wonderful weekend.